Today from the global lane, where in the world Nigeria? More Christians are being killed there than anywhere else in the world. So who are the sinister forces behind the massacres and why? Last year, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims were chased from Burma. Now more ethnic cleansing. This time the victims are Christians. Fair trade agreements with China and North Korean nuclear disarmament. Sound U.S. policy or just wishful thinking? And Judge Kavanaugh. Buckle up for another bruising Supreme Court fight. And it's all right here, right now from the global lane. Where in the world Nigeria, where a new wave of violence from herdsmen has killed hundreds of Christians in the northern part of the country. Church leaders are calling it ethnic cleansing. Joining us with the latest from Abuja is CBN Nigeria Director Felix Oyesomoje. And joining us from our Washington, D.C. studio with the latest is Emmanuel Ogebe. Emmanuel's an international human rights attorney. He's had relatives killed in the recent violence. First, Emmanuel, tell us what happened to your family members.
Yes, Gary, just about 10 days or so ago, there was a horrific massacre in Plateau State in north-central Nigeria. And I just, saw the news from contacts there. It wasn't until a couple of days later that I learned that 6 of my relatives died in that attack. From what we've been able to piece together, the husband and his pregnant wife tried to take her out of the house to safety and come back for the kids. But they ran into the herdsmen on their way. They shot him and his pregnant wife, and they went into their home and they killed their 4-year-old son and their 6-year-old daughter who were asleep in their beds. They also had 2 relatives who were visiting for the summer break, and those were killed as well. So this was really a horrific slaughter. Over 238 people were killed. And Gary, what breaks my heart is the brother to the gentleman who died says that the family spotted the corpses and they said, we want to take our corpses and bury them. And the authorities refused and insisted on giving them a mass burial because they don't want the truth to emerge as to how many people really died in that horrific massacre in Plateau State.
Felix, has the violence against Christians subsided or is it continuing?
Gary, I will say we have noticed some escalation in the last few months. So you are right to say it's increasing at this point.
Where is it specifically happening, Felix, and why?
It's happening more in the Middle Belt area of the country. And the reason simply is because the Fulani herdsmen take their cattle into people's farmlands. They eat up their crops on the farm, and when the people challenge them, then before you know, they respond with AK-47s.
Where do they get the AK-47s? So I understand this is different than the Boko Haram violence, those terrorists. Where do they get the AK-47s, and why are they responding that way?
That has been the question because given how much an AK-47 will go for, a Fulani herdsman will probably need to sell all his cattle to be able to buy an AK-47.
Gary, what we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians, they're trying to possess their lands, and they're trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider Christians to be.
Who is funding them? Who's providing them with the weapons, and why?
Yeah, now, that's a very good question. We've always wondered how they could afford such sophisticated arms. In the few occasions where they run into the military, they overpower the military with the level of weaponry. And there's several theories. One of them, of course, is that the arms proliferation that resulted from the collapse of Libya saw an influx of arms into the country that fell into the hands of both Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen. But even more sinister is the fact that a lot of these cattle are owned by very rich Fulanis who are in government and who are in power. So there is a strong belief that the Fulanis, the ruling elite, are actually funding these herdsmen to conduct these attacks, because that way they can dominate politically and they can dominate physically in terms of land grab. The attacks are coming from the Fulani herdsmen who actually brought jihad. They brought violent jihad to Nigeria in 1804. And many believe that this is simply a continuation of that jihad. I can tell you that in Plateau State in particular, over 50 communities of Christians have been cleared. They've been de-Christianized. The Christians have been pushed out, and these communities have been overrun and taken over by the Fulani herdsmen and their cattle. So this group is actually worse than Boko Haram. Boko Haram has rules of engagement. They have some kind of ideology. These people slash, kill, and burn. I think they exemplify what the scripture says in John 10:10. The thief comes but to steal, to kill, and destroy. And they're destroying. Christians are being hunted on their farms, in their homes. They're being slaughtered. This is a genocide. In Benue State alone, this year, over 500 Christians have been killed in that one state, including, Gary, you must have heard about this, the shocking attack in April where they attacked a church mass and they killed 19 people, including the priests who were serving communion in the church that morning. So 19 worshippers were killed in church. One more recent incident, last weekend, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Jos, his home was attacked and one person was killed. So, Gary, what we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians, they're trying to possess their lands, and they're trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider Christians to be.
CBN, I know, has worked in Nigeria for years, Felix, and I know in the past we've reached out to help people displaced by the Boko Haram violence. So what are we doing now to help?
One of the things our team just came back from a place called Kagoro in the north central area of Nigeria, where has experienced a lot of violence as well related to the Fulani herdsmen. We just came back from doing a whole 1 week of free medical services to that area because a lot of people are suffering with no medical attention. So we've been able to go there and provide free medical services. And right now we are talking with another group on the outskirts of Jos that just happened this past week. We are talking to a group there to see if we can go in there, probably do a medical mission as well, and then do some kind of empowerment projects. And so we are talking, but we can't move in now because it's still too volatile to go in there. So we're waiting until things settle down, then we'll go in there and see what we can do to help the people.
So what can our viewers do, Emmanuel?
Well, there are several things that could be done. Obviously, the first is prayer. But we're at a point where thoughts and prayers are not sufficient anymore. Over 2,000 people have died from the violence in Nigeria this year already. We're talking about deaths in the thousands. Nigeria is now the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. And so we need international pressure. The UK House of Lords just last week had a debate, and they said this is no longer a herdsman-farmer conflict. This is genocide. Most of the Lords were consistent in their depiction of what is happening. Now, in addition to that, we need aid. You know, I know that CBN 700 Club is in Nigeria, so if people support CBN, we know that CBN will deliver to the people who are afflicted. But we need the members of Congress, the U.S. Congress, write to your congressman. They need to appoint a special envoy on the issue of Nigeria. And also the United States needs to not sell aircraft to General Buhari's regime. The Nigerian Air Force has been used in attacks against Christian communities that tried to defend themselves against the herdsmen in Adamawa State. The U.S. shouldn't sell aircraft to General Buhari, who will use them against Christians. And so I think there are lots of things that can be done, but these are some of the key things that should happen.
I think one of the things we need the most is prayers, because I personally believe that nothing happens that doesn't have a spiritual background. So whatever is going on right now has some kind of spiritual underpinnings. And I believe that if we begin to deal with it from that point, it makes it easier. After all, the Bible tells us that we do not war against flesh and blood. And so we know that there's spiritual issues. So we need to pray. That's the first thing we need. We need prayers that God will continue to protect Christians wherever they are all over the country. And the other thing, too, is to sensitize the international community to what is going on here, because I believe that once that happens and people know that it's not only Nigerians that are crying out, that then probably it will make them begin to see that people are taking notice outside of the country, and probably that will dissuade them from their plans.
Yeah, and Gary, if I can say one last thing, there is a Christian girl who was abducted by Boko Haram, and they asked her to convert to Islam, or and then she would be set free, and she refused. She's a 15-year-old girl. Her name is Leah, and Leah stood for Christ and has been held by the terrorists for 135 days now. So I want everyone who hears this to pray for Leah. She's a genuine heroine of the faith in this era.
And there are many of them there in Nigeria. We appreciate them, and we'll be praying for her as well. Have you no shame, sir? That's how the United Nations Human Rights Chief responded when a Myanmar diplomat recently told the UN his government was committed to the defense of human rights. And those who follow the plight of the Rohingya and the Kachin know differently. Here with us to give us more is Pastor Bob Roberts of Northwood Church in Keller, Texas. He's part of the Faith Coalition to Stop Genocide in Burma. Pastor Roberts, we've reported regularly about the Rohingya, the refugees there, persecuted Muslims, chased out of Burma, now living in Bangladesh. And I know you visited them, so how are they doing and what did you witness?
Well, in October, I actually went to Cox's Bazar and saw the Rohingya and what was going on there. Me and the former ambassador for religious freedom, David Saperstein, along with Majid Mohammed. David is a Jewish rabbi, by the way, and Majid Mohammed. And so together we went and we looked at what was going on there. And obviously we're shocked by what we saw. But I got back home and I started having people say, you know, you're an evangelical, you're a Christian. What about the Kachin? And I'm sorry to say, I didn't know that much about the Kachin, and began to hear a lot of stories about what was going on, that it was difficult, that was challenging. And so I went and I was there for about a week. I was able to get into the Kachin state, and I was able to visit with many of the IDP camps and a lot of the things that were taking place. And I was frankly pretty alarmed by what I saw. And what alarmed me even more so, I was curious how well the Kachin actually understood what had happened in the Rakhine state with the Rohingya, and how similar the beginning of what's going on in the Kachin state was very similar with what was going on with the Rohingya. So I'm very concerned, more than just a little concerned. I'm very concerned about what I see taking place, and I think now's the time to respond to it. For the most part, there's not a lot that can be done anymore with what's taking place with the Rohingya. Obviously, you've still got maybe 400,000 or 500,000 that are left out of the 1.3 million that were there, but you see the exact same things taking place with the Kachin now. So I'm very concerned about it.
I want to ask you first about the Rohingya, because I know it's the largest mass migration of a people group in recent history. So what do you think it's going to take to get them back home?
They don't want to go home. You've got to understand, they had 450 villages that were scorched earth. Basically, I was able to visit with some people with our American embassy there, and the Rohingya that are there are frankly afraid. But it's increasingly difficult for them to leave and get to Bangladesh. So it's quite serious. The conditions at the camp that you see, the largest one in the world, the conditions are horrible, open sewage, and now the monsoon has started. And I had the privilege of getting to visit with Ambassador Brownback now, along with some other groups that are working there. And the great tragedy is when the people went in there, what they did, Gary, they started cutting all the wood down for firewood, and they ran out of wood. So the next thing they started doing was digging the roots out of the ground. And so it's not just the monsoon. Now they're concerned about serious mudslides because there's nothing to hold the ground stable. And so they're literally preparing for hundreds of thousands to die because there's nowhere for them to go. And they're afraid to go back home.
Wow, what a tragedy that is. I guess the reason for us as believers to pray and also do what we can. But of course, as Christians, we have compassion for the Rohingya, but also our audience has concern for the Kachin. So tell us some more about the Kachin. What did you witness when you saw them?
Well, let me just a little bit of background, if I could, on the Kachin. Believe it or not, it's a state where 95% of the people are Christians, and they're primarily Baptist, believe it or not. And so what happened is they're a minority group. They're in the Kachin state, representing about 1.4 million people, similar to what the Rakhine state was with the Rohingya. And so the first response that the Burmese have had is it's more of an ethnic cleansing issue. And over 60 of the churches that have been destroyed, they put Buddhist pagodas on top of those to reclaim it, and so forth. And you've got to understand, these people have a rich heritage. It goes all the way back to the early 1830s when Adoniram Judson first came. These were some of the first to accept the gospel.
I don't know that the president, that Aung San Suu Kyi, the woman they call the lady, would be complicit in this. Don't you really think it's the military that's behind all this and really in control of Myanmar?
I do. That's my opinion, but I don't know that. I'm guessing. Yeah. So I can't say for sure, but I'm prone to agree with you. She took such a strong stand throughout her life. And frankly, when I talked to many of the Burmese Baptists that I visited with, that's what they said. They said they felt like she was unable because of the military. Here's something else that alarmed me, Gary. The same units that were doing all the military destruction down in the Rakhine state, they've moved those up to the Kachin state. Now, the problem is when you radicalize and you create such violence among soldiers that have been raping and murder, you just don't turn that switch off. I'm seeing the same thing. I'm seeing 450 villages that have been destroyed, and they're pushing all of these refugees towards the churches in the two major cities. I mean, it's going to be easy pickings for the military if they were to choose to go in.
Well, what can our viewers do then, Bob?
The number one thing I would say is talk to your congressman and your senator. But the problem is, as Westerners, we can't get there for the most part. We can't go volunteer. So the biggest thing that you could do is to send money and resources to the Kachin Baptist Convention because they're there and they're trying to do something. Third, I would say, and this ought to be the first thing, is to pray. They're staying strong in their faith. I mean, they're not compromising. They're not giving up. But it's a very serious issue. This is not a minor thing.
Okay, faith, prayer, action. So Bob
Yes,
Roberts, the Faith Coalition to Stop Genocide in Burma, thanks so much for joining us. All eyes are on President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, but many foreign policy experts say the bigger threat to America's future comes from China, not Russia. President Trump plans to impose more tariffs on China, this time a tax of about 10% on $200 billion worth of goods. Here with more is China expert Stephen Mosier. He's author of the book, The Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order. Okay, Stephen, thanks for joining us again. Critics say this is the start of a trade war with China. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's the start of a trade war with China at all. I think people need to understand that China has been at war with us across all domains, including trade, for the last 25 years. It's a low-key war. It's a non-kinetic war. But make no mistake, they've been in a trade war with us for a quarter century. What President Trump is trying to do is end the trade war that China is carrying out against us. You can't start a trade war that's already been underway for a long time.
So what is President Trump really after with China? Is he on the right course, Stephen?
Oh, absolutely. I argue that American companies have never been able to compete fairly with Chinese companies because, look, if you're an American company and you go into China, you're squeezed dry of your high-tech technology, your software, your intellectual property, and then you're squeezed back out of China. American companies aren't competing with Chinese companies. People need to understand they're competing with the Chinese party state. And that is an unwinnable situation. It's got to change. And it starts with righting the trade imbalance. We simply cannot sustain a $400 billion loss every year in trade terms to China. And add to that $600 billion. That's not my estimate. That's the FBI's estimate. $600 billion in stolen intellectual property. 600 billion plus 400 billion is $1 trillion being made off with China, by China every year. We cannot let that continue.
And some of the critics of this policy are saying, well, wait a minute, what about American farmers? The reciprocity of tariffs that China's imposing on the U.S. is only hurting our agricultural business.
Well, the Chinese are responding by imposing punitive tariffs on a few goods that they think will hurt President Trump politically. And you know, I had to smile the other day when President for Life Xi Jinping, make no mistake about it, he will be in office forever. He's the new Red Emperor in the mold of Chairman Mao Zedong. Xi Jinping said, "We Chinese don't turn the other cheek. We punch." And I'm thinking he's talking to the greatest counterpuncher the world has ever seen. In fact, we have a lot of leverage over China. They need to continue draining us of our high technology, draining us of industry, transferring most of the world's industrial production to China in order to succeed at their China 2025 plan. What is the China 2025 plan? It's a plan to have all high-tech manufacturing, especially cutting-edge things like robotics and so forth, manufactured in China by 2025. And from there, 10 years later, China 2035 plan is to dominate the region and the world. It's not in our interest to let that happen.
Now on to North Korea. What do you think of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's recent visit to North Korea, and what did he accomplish there?
Well, here's where the rubber met the road. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to Pyongyang and said one thing. He said, "I need a complete list of your missile production facilities, of the locations of your missiles, the nuclear production facilities, the location of the existing nuclear weapons that you have, 20 or 30 in all. And then we need to set a phased process of dismantling all of these things. And once this happens," he said, "we can talk about a peace treaty. We can talk about withdrawing American troops. We will have peace on the Korean Peninsula." The North Koreans didn't like the fact that there were real demands being made of them in exchange for lifting the sanctions. And I have to say, this administration, for the first time, I've been following this for 30 years now, this administration, for the first time, has gone about dealing with North Korea the right way. It is imposing sanctions on North Korea and demanding results. Every parent in the world knows that you don't reward bad behavior in your children. We've been rewarding bad behavior in North Korea from the time of the Clinton administration, giving them money and saying, "Please play nice." And of course, we got more of the same. Now we're going about it the right way. We're punishing bad behavior. The punishing sanctions will not be lifted unless North Korea complies. And in fact, there's a lot more we can do. We can actually ask countries to send their North Korean workers home, from which North Korea gets a lot of remittances overseas. We can cut back on trade even further. We can put more pressure on China, for example.
And Stephen, since the Singapore summit, though, we've seen North Korea continue with its nuclear and missile development programs. Is Kim Jong-un sincere about denuclearization, or is he just once again playing us?
Well, I think that Kim Jong-un, who is the third in the Kim dynasty to rule North Korea, is always playing us, is always engaging in deceit and deception. But the fact is that we have now put him in a box. We put him in a box by getting his attention, by getting him to Singapore, by showing him that he had one of two avenues he could pursue. He could either continue his nuclear weapons program, or he could develop North Korea into a modern, dynamic state with open borders.
Grab your seatbelts and buckle up, because Democrats are getting ready for another nasty drag-out fight over a Republican Supreme Court nominee. Chuck Schumer pledges to do all he can to stop Judge Brett Kavanaugh from replacing retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court.
I'm going to fight this nomination with everything I've got.
But the only thing Senator Schumer's got against this nominee are political differences. Nothing of substance to prevent his confirmation. Lack of experience on the bench? Nope. Kavanaugh has served for 12 years on the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C., making 300 decisions there. Lack of understanding of the Constitution and the judiciary? Nope. He's a Yale Law School graduate. He clerked for Justice Kennedy. And like Justice Kagan, he's taught at Harvard Law School. Immoral? Nope. He's a devout Catholic who coaches basketball. He serves up meals to the homeless. Too political, you say? Well, his time serving at the George Bush White House and with Special Counsel Kenneth Starr are pluses. They've given him a better understanding of how the executive branch of government and the Justice Department function. So here's the real reason Schumer and other Democrats oppose Kavanaugh.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent.
Judge Kavanaugh is an originalist. He does not believe the Constitution has changed over time. He doesn't think Supreme Court justices should legislate from the bench. When American voters and legislators reject left-wing ideas, liberals often judge shop. They find a court that shares their political views. They present their legal case before the judge. The court rules in their favor. Presto changeo. You suddenly have a federally imposed law delivered from the bench. And often only one or two people make that decision for the entire nation. Such was the case with the president's travel ban and the Colorado same-sex marriage wedding cake cases. Thankfully, the Supreme Court overturned those decisions. No, Senator Schumer, the responsibility to legislate belongs to you and your colleagues, not the Supreme Court or our federal judges. You win some, you lose some. I guess you're just tired of losing. But I doubt you'll win this one because most Americans and even some members of your own party see no reason other than political differences to oppose this brilliant, decent American family man and jurist. The spoils go to the victor. This time, Donald Trump won the presidency and the right to make another pick. And like he did with Neil Gorsuch, he's made a good one. We all pray we won't see a repeat of the viciousness and the character assassination that we witnessed during the confirmation hearings of Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas. Remember that?
I am a victim of this process. My name has been harmed. My integrity has been harmed. My character has been harmed. My family has been harmed. My friends have been harmed. There is nothing this committee, this body, or this country can do to give me my good name back.
Justice Thomas, you've served this nation and the Supreme Court honorably, and you do have your good name back. Now, join us in praying that Judge Brett Kavanaugh will endure and keep his. Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.